Our question
Right.
today comes from Mary, who identifies as a submissive. Her husband, however, is very much vanilla, but in order to address their waning sex life, has agreed to participate in kinky play. The problem is that anytime they do a scene together, it feels scripted and planned. She doesn't feel the genuine power exchange at all. She asks if this is just how it feels when the other person isn't into it as you are, and if there are any online resources like books, classes, or podcasts that she might be able to use to help introduce BDSM into her relationship with her husband.
Yeah, to some degree, that is how it feels. If you consider love a kink, what is it like to have sex with someone who doesn't love you, who doesn't want to be there? It can be scripted, it can be whatever, but it's not going to be what you were hoping it would be. Now, I do think that there are things that can be investigated to say, hey, is this something that he just hasn't awakened? Is this something that he just hasn't gotten in touch with and needs to find and has in himself, but just hasn't incorporated or integrated into himself? And he may be able to find that, or no, is this guy just not going to integrate that or doesn't have that to integrate, or it's not who he is? So how to explore that? Books for sure is a great starting place. My favorite teaching book that I started with is Screw the Roses, Send Me the Thorns. I also would recommend the new Topping book and the new Bottoming book. Those are classics of BDSM teaching from a instructional perspective. I think that erotica has a lot to offer there in terms of fantasizing, imagining what it might feel like to do something, not what it might look like. And I think that's why a lot of guys maybe is like, well, what's the special thing about spanking you with a whip? What do I get out of it? I'm just hitting you, right? What you get out of it is a particular psychological, emotional experience that is an expression of the parts of yourself that you keep hidden. The opportunity to really be free, to be your real self. Now, the question is your real self that dominant? And it may not be, in which case there's some challenging conversations ahead, but it may be. And the way to explore that, partly through erotica, partly through these instructional books that I've mentioned, and partly through conversations in which she is able to focus less on the behaviors she wants. I want you to spank me is less helpful in this circumstance than, hey, it really turns me on when I see you as bigger than me or as stronger than me, or it really turns me on when you get all commanding. And pick a moment where he's done it, when he's gotten irritated and snapped at her, then say, oh man, it's actually kind of hot when you snap at me. Okay, those are moments that can reframe what it means to be kinky and start to talk more deeply about the psychology and the intimate experience of that. Otherwise, yeah, it'll continue to feel scripted because he is following her script. She says, hey, I want you to do these things, and he is by rote, without actually understanding it, he is doing those things. It reminds me a lot, I don't know if you ever saw this, way back in, this is dating myself here, but way back in the day, Claire Danes and Leonardo DiCaprio put a movie out of Romeo and Juliet. It was a cool idea. I love the concept of the movie, but it was the original Shakespearean language sort of set in the modern day. Many times you could tell they did not understand what they were saying. They had memorized the lines as actors, and the director had said, well, you're angry. And so they said it angrily. They got a vague sort of sense of that. But they didn't really understand what they were saying word by word. And it reminds me a lot of that. I compared it at the time, because I love Shakespeare. The experience of watching that movie I compared to fucking a Coke can, which is uncomfortable and bound to leave no one happy with this.
Not advisable.
Not advisable. But the reason was that lack of understanding is that it was a role. It was scripted. It was not felt. And in order to get it felt, what needs to change is understanding, not the script. More scripting is not going to help. What could help is a deeper exploration of what these things might mean. Hey, I want to be spanked, but I don't just want you to spank me. I want you to mean it. And what does it mean to mean a spanking? What does that mean? Well, the husband is going to have to do some work here to figure out what is inside of him that might enjoy that. And either it's not inside of him or he's been too uncomfortable to admit it. And that second one is the more hopeful of the scenarios, but even then presents some difficulties.
This is a really good question because it allows us to separate apart the maneuvers that people employ during kinky play and the underlying spirit that embodies those maneuvers. Many men have engaged in spanking or tying up a partner without having any clear idea of the underlying kinky spirit of it. They're not really embodying a true dominant persona. Maybe they are for like a hot 2 seconds or like 2 minutes, but it's almost this sort of, oh, isn't this so naughty and aren't we being all peculiar? There isn't a sense of like this person, Mary's husband, is not really embodying the dominant spirit. He is just going through the motions. And we've often criticized those Cosmo magazine articles like, oh, 10 ways to spice up your bedroom. Maybe you should use these leather cuffs or this sort of dildo, and that will quote unquote spice it up, as if the toys that you use are the most important aspect of what's really going on. Because you could have incredibly intense kinky play without a single implement at all. And that's only because the person embodies that spirit of dominance, and that's not what she's getting. She's feeling the disconnect. The other thing I think that's important is that she seems to be asking for resources to introduce kink into the relationship, but it seems like she's already done that, though. She says that she's asked him to do these things, and every time they do a scene together, so they've gotten to the point where they're doing scenes together. So it's not as if they haven't introduced it already. What she's trying to get at is, how can I get my husband to really mean it? What book can I get him to read so that he really means it? There's this concept of faking it till you make it, which I don't think really applies here. That's a maneuver you deploy for things like projecting confidence in public situations, acclimating yourself to difficult things. But those are not fundamental parts of who you really are. When you're engaged in deeply intimate kink play, it's very hard to fake it till you make it. It has to come from within and out, and very difficult to do it from without in. What are your thoughts?
I partially agree and partially disagree. The partial disagreement, I'll say, is this. Part of the issue that's happening here, I suspect, is he is going through the script that she's given him when they're engaging in pseudo-kinky play. And I say pseudo because if it's not felt, then it's not really kinky on some level. It's just the smoke and mirrors without the underlying substrate. And he is attentionally focused on whether he's doing it right, on whether he's following the script correctly, on whether he is giving her what she wants, or he is focused on how this script does not suit him. And that's where his attention is. Faking it until you make it can work in some kinky situations if the person focuses on, what do I like? How does this make me feel? What things might make me feel in a way that I might like? What other things could I do that are off script that might encourage me to feel these ways? That requires in this case, the submissive partner to give the dominant the freedom to go off script and be like, look, you can do whatever you want. Here's the limits. Limit conversation is important. But within these limits, take all the pressure off. I don't need an outcome. What I really want long-term is for you to do whatever the hell you want, whatever that is. But I'm getting off on your enjoyment, so I need you to enjoy it. You can't be mild about it. The one rule is you can't be bored or mild about your experience. So you can do whatever you want as long as you're not bored by it. Now, if he can't find anything that he's not bored by, that's another problem. Because then either he wants to be in the submissive role, or he just doesn't have it in him. He's just not looking for that intensive an experience. I think there's a lot of people that just don't want to have that intensive a sex life. It's something, hey, it's 20 minutes on Saturday, a couple times a month. It's nice enough, right? And that's it. That's all they want out of their sex life. I don't think there's anything invalid about that. Now, I will say, a shameless self-promotion. My book is written specifically for this. So this is actually the subtextual intention of my book, is to give a very incredibly detailed explanation of the underlying psychological substrate so that people can find their way to what things they mean, what things they want to mean. And so for this dominant, if he were in front of me, I would say, let's start with the king archetype. Let's sit down and watch Lord of the Rings and tell me what you think about Aragorn, Mufasa as a king. Let's trigger some archetypal understandings of kingship and talk about how are you incorporating that, not just in kink, not just in sex, but in your relationship, in your life. In what ways are you king? Do you feel drawn to be more kingly? Do you feel like other things are holding you back from being kingly, that people would judge me, or it would be too tyrannical, or I can't just tell people what to do, or what? Well, your wife is telling you you can. So you have to find out how to embody that. And I think understanding the archetypal impulses, understanding the structure of what dominance means, in what ways have you earned your wife's respect so that when you tell her that you want a blowjob, it makes her wet immediately because she thinks you deserve one. Have you done that work? Are you a person your wife admires? Should she admire you, or is she doing you a favor if she says she respects you? Is it earned or given? That was the intention behind the book, was to give a substrate. Now, it's a lot of reading. It is very detailed, but that's because if there's not an intuitive leap, then I have to go piece by piece to try to mechanically trigger what should be an intuitive leap on some level. But yeah, that's my shameless plug for my book.